Welcome to Still Unbelievable, a podcast by Reason Press, where we examine religious claims, especially those made by Christians, and we regularly respond to items that are featured on the podcast Unbelievable. We embrace dialogue, but as sceptical former believers, we will also criticise unfounded claims and unsupported beliefs. This is Matthew, and in this episode of Still Unbelievable, I shall be picking apart a recent episode of the Unbelievable podcast. The episode in question is on intelligent design from March 2022, and features Casey Luskin in conversation with Adam Shapiro. Casey is an ID proponent from the Discovery Institute, while Adam is a science writer who is critical of intelligent design. See links 1 and 2 in the show notes. The Unbelievable episode has the usual host, Justin Briley, chairing the conversation while each defends their position. In this response, I will be specifically looking into the scientific claims that are made to address questions like, can intelligent design really be taken seriously? In today's world of significant scientific advances, is there really a place for intelligent design outside of its religious comfort zone? But more importantly, I'll be looking closely at what Casey says to see if there is any legitimate reason why I, or even you, should consider ID as a serious option. Justin introduces Casey by his book.
Let's start with you, Casey, both new to the show, but tell us about the Comprehensive Guide to Science and Faith, because this was really the thing that made me want to bring you on.
See link 3 for details of Casey's book. In his intro, Casey says this about the book.
And it addresses common topics in intelligent design like, is intelligent design a scientific theory, backed by evidence in fields like biology or physics?
Notice the invocation of the phrase, scientific theory. A scientific theory is what is used to explain observed fact or phenomena in the natural world that are confirmed through experiment or observation. This is why we have the theory of gravity and the theory of evolution. They are explanation of facts. For intelligent design to be a scientific theory, design must be an observed fact in the natural world that is confirmed by experiment or observation. Maybe Casey will get to the evidence in biology and physics as the episode progresses. Casey also goes on to say,
it takes an old earth Christian perspective, and so there's some articles that are looking at how you can reconcile an old earth with a Christian viewpoint.
Here we have the religious angle of the book. It takes an old earth Christian perspective. Make no mistake, this book absolutely intends to conclude that the Christian God is responsible for everything. This isn't about following the science to its raw conclusion, no matter how uncomfortable. This is about picking the science to reach a preferred conclusion. This is exactly why we should be cautious of organisations like the Discovery Institute, who publish books claiming to be scientific. Do we really trust that they'll be unbiased in their critiques? Answers in Genesis also publishes material claiming to be scientific, but takes a young earth Christian perspective. After the intros are done, Casey carries on by saying,
Sure, well, vested or not, I think that there is very good evidence that the intelligent design movement is on the advance, and I look forward to talking about this.
And
intelligent design is a scientific theory which holds that many aspects of life in the universe are best explained by an intelligent cause rather than undirected causes such as natural selection.
Here again we have the assertion of intelligent design being a scientific theory. But we also have the overused Christian reference to best explanation. Best explanation is not a phrase that you typically find in scientific literature because of its subjective connotations. Science prefers objectivity, such as experimentation and repeatability. Whenever you hear an appeal to best explanation, be on your guard for what comes next.
And I think that this is one of the reasons why intelligent design is on the advance, is because intelligent design has a very powerful and persuasive argument. So intelligent design is based upon our observations from nature and the world around us, that when intelligent agents act, they create high levels of what we call complex and specified information.
Notice the appeal to argument here. He didn't say evidence, he said argument. I am sure ID does have a powerful argument, but that doesn't tell us if it's true. Evidence does that. The appeal to intelligent agents and specified information sounds like he's going to get into the DNA argument. This is normally where this kind of discussion ends up.
So what ID theorists do is they make a hypothesis. They use the scientific method that we see in every biology textbook: observation, hypothesis, experiment, conclusion.
Good stuff. Everybody likes a hypothesis, especially one that is accompanied by details on how to experimentally test it.
And we can test for high CSI through experiments and other forms of scientific investigations.
Great. Let's have some details.
As one of quite a few examples, protein scientist Douglas Axe published mutational sensitivity tests in the Journal of Molecular Biology, which were funded by Discovery Institute, by the way, his research, which showed that the likelihood of a chance sequence of amino acids forming a functional beta-lactamase enzyme in E. coli was less than 10 to the 74th power.
Link 4 appears to be the article that Casey mentions. My conclusion from reading the article is that the experiment showed that the enzymes were functionally stable and resistant to mutational change until a critical point was reached. And then the enzyme became non-functional. Having referenced this article, Casey goes on a rant about the low probability of enzymes evolving via natural selection in the first place. My reading of the article is that it doesn't reference how the enzyme evolves, only how resistant it is to mutational change. I don't see what Casey is referring to, and the specific number he mentions isn't found in the link. Maybe we're not reading the same article, or maybe one of us has completely misunderstood what was written. Alternatively, see link 5 for an article by Douglas Axe in the same journal, where he says, "The prevalence of low-level function in 4 such experiments indicates that roughly 1 in 10 to the 64 signature consistent sequence forms a working domain. Combined with the estimated prevalence of plausible hydropathic patterns for any fold, and of relevant folds for particular functions, this implies the overall prevalence of sequences performing a specific function by any domain-sized fold may be as low as 1 in 10 to 77, adding to the body of evidence that functional folds require highly extraordinary sequences." Neither number matches what Casey just reported, but that's not really the quibble, because they're still large numbers. The quibble is that Axe does not defer to intelligent design. He says that the low probability means an extraordinary sequence is required. This may be true, but how Casey sees this as evidence for intelligence is a bigger mystery. The problem with appeals to low probability is that low probability events happen all the time. All that's needed for a low probability event to occur is time and a high volume of activity. Let me give you an example. Consider the game of 10-pin bowling. How many people in the history of the game have ever played 10-pin bowling? It's likely to be millions. Now consider this. Imagine someone who has never played the game in their entire life, goes to play with a group of friends, and in their very first bowl scores a strike, knocks down all 10 pins in their first ever go at bowling, with no assistance. What do you think the chances are of that happening? I have no idea, but I think it's pretty low. However, with the number of people who have played the game, do you think that it has happened? What is the probability that it has happened at some point in history? Do you agree that it is likely that it has happened? Now I'll tell you that I know it's happened, because it happened to me. When I was about 20, I played 10-pin bowling for the first time ever, having had no experience of the game, no idea how to play or even how to score. Yet somehow I managed to score a strike on my first ever bowl. It will be at least 3 years before I manage to do it again, but that's not the point. The point is, I managed a very low probability event. However, due to the millions of people who have had to play a very first bowl, it's effectively guaranteed that someone, somewhere, will hit that low probability. I doubt that I am alone in having achieved that. This is the pitfall that Casey has fallen into by appealing to low probabilities. Due to the sheer number of mutations that happen in enzymes globally, it is guaranteed that a low probability functional combination will happen in some of them. And those few will pass that function on. Isolating a single low probability event without the proper context gives a false impression of what's really happening and leaves you open to accusations of dishonesty.
We are justified in concluding design. There's both a positive argument for design and a negative argument that natural causes are not up to the task.
Notice that Casey bases his justification on concluding design by deferring to argument. He didn't say evidence, he said argument.
And of course, our conclusion of design is held scientifically. We hold it tentatively, subject to future investigations, and maybe it'll be overturned. Maybe it'll turn out to be wrong, so we hold the conclusion tentatively.
I hope that's true.
Sort of to boil the ID argument down.
Argument or evidence? This is getting very confusing. Surely Casey doesn't think the two are the same thing, does he?
A computer-like system of commands and codes that processes the information in the DNA, and then the result of that information processing is irreducibly complex molecular machines and multi-machine systems. But where in our experience do things like complex and specified information, programming code, and machine-like structures come from? They have only one known source, and that's intelligence.
This is still the same segment, and Casey has moved on to DNA and the analogy to computer code. Personally, I don't think the analogy works. I don't think computer code is comparable to DNA. But that's not the only problem here. We know humans write computer code. We can witness them do it. I do it in my day job. Pointing to something we understand and can watch humans doing does not automatically translate into something that happens in nature that we don't fully understand. Even if I concede that computer code has similarities to DNA, there are too many elements that are not similar, like the replication process. This is an appeal that is based on the argument that human-created computer code has some similarities to how natural DNA works, but it does not provide evidence to back that conclusion up. And Casey has stated that the ID argument has evidence. If there is actually evidence, why does he even need to roll out this questionable analogy? Why not simply present the evidence and the method used to test it? This is the big issue I have with this entire approach. The claim is made that evidence exists, but what we're presented with is rambling argument.
Because ID has strong arguments, it is persuading prominent people, and we've seen high-level converts to intelligent design, including faculty at top institutions, even including Nobel laureates, like Brian Josephson, a physicist at Cambridge University.
Here again, Casey appeals to arguments in support of ID, and then swiftly shifts to a version of popularity appeals because it's converted some high-profile people to his side. I have no doubt that there are people who will be convinced to adopt intelligent design based on argument. That won't convince me though. I want to see evidence discussed and assessed and experiments replicated. That's my standard. Link 6 is the Wikipedia entry of Brian Josephson, mentioned by Casey just now. He's a colourful character. Having won a Nobel Prize in his 20s, he's skirted with the paranormal and other pseudo-activities since the 1970s. This happens. Winning a Nobel Prize does not mean everything you do after that is automatically scientific and worthwhile. It does not mean that your opinions on subjects unrelated to the prize are automatically deserving of value. Brian Josephson is an example of this, and, contrary to what Casey suggests, this should not be taken as an intellectual endorsement. But if playing the popularity game is something that appeals to you, may I recommend Project Steve. See Link 7.
The theistic evolution or evolutionary creation camp, often represented by the folks at BioLogos, they don't think that we can scientifically detect design in nature. Either we cannot detect it or we have not detected it. Whereas intelligent design proponents, this is not a theological view. This is an argument that we're making based upon science to show that we think that you can make a case from the scientific evidence that there is design in nature, both in biology and in physics and cosmology.
It's not for me to determine what Biologos' position is on evidence for theistic evolution. But interesting that Casey brings up this point. Is this a critique of Biologos? Is there a serious point of disagreement between Biologos and the Discovery Institute? That aside, Casey is once again affirming that his stance has evidential support. And yet, so far, what we've had is appeal and argument. I'm unimpressed.
You want to talk about more high-level converts to intelligent design? New York University philosopher and legal scholar Thomas Nagel, a very well-known atheist, published a book, Mind and Cosmos, with Oxford University Press in 2012, where he defended intelligent design. He said that intelligent design arguments have merit, that they've stimulated his thinking, and that we don't deserve a lot of the abuse that we get in the intelligent design movement.
The key thing to note here is that Thomas Nagel is, and remains, atheist. He's also a philosopher, not a scientist. This is relevant because scientists live in a world where ideas live and die by what evidence there is to support them. If you want your idea to be taken seriously, you must do more than just defend it. You must do very hard work showing its evidential value. Sometimes there is very severe opposition to ideas in science, and sometimes that opposition is not warranted. And there have been cases where right ideas have received undeserved opposition. However, the evidential support for these ideas has eventually prevailed. This is the strength of the scientific process. Robust evidence translates into robust support. Rather than try to shame the scientific community into accepting his ideas, Casey should instead be focusing on finding and generating the evidence that would convince the scientific community. If he's so sure it exists, he'll get them on his side. I could not find a link to read Nagel's document, but I did find something that discusses his document. See link 8. Nagel appears to take the philosophical approach that ideas should be freely discussed and offers suggestions around how ID can be raised in the classroom. I don't see anything that suggests it should be taught as valid science, or even as truth, just that the idea should have the freedom of discussion. I am on board with this. From a philosophical standpoint, of course ID should be discussed. Wrong ideas should not be excluded from discussion, because by discussing wrong ideas alongside right ideas, we get to learn the difference and work on a method of identifying which category future ideas fall into. This does not apply to the science classroom though. Of further interest is the infamous wedge document, found in the links at the bottom of link 8. I've linked to it in link 9 because it is an important document which should concern everybody. This is a strategy document with Discovery Institute identification that appears to lay out a strategy for dismantling honest scientific education. It's nefarious. And if it truly is the strategy of the Discovery Institute, then everybody in education should be concerned. And this is a good reason to exclude them with maximum prejudice.
Many people take the idea that there is a designer behind life in the universe to be epistemically friendly towards theism. If you want to take a Bayesian approach, the idea that there's design in nature is more probable on theism than it is under atheism. Okay, so we can make an argument like that.
I wholeheartedly agree. The idea of a designer is more friendly towards theism. Design in nature absolutely is more probable under theism. The question is there design in nature? Casey suggested right at the beginning of the episode that he takes a scientific approach and that evidence plays a part. Yet so far we've heard nothing but argument and appeal. If he has evidence that should be convincing, why does he even need to bring an argument to the discussion? Why not start with the evidence and how it was gathered and how it can be replicated and let the discussion flow from there?
Is there design in the universe or not?
Hurrah! Are we about to get a detailed objective methodology of how design is defined and detected that leaves us all in no doubt whatsoever that the universe and everything in it is designed?
It's a scientific case for intelligent design. I didn't
Well, spit it out, man. Let's hear it.
ID has had a scientific renaissance since the Dover trial. Over 100 peer-reviewed papers have been published in scientific journals.
And yet, the only one that's been referenced so far was one that lent on probability and not a testable hypothesis.
We're funding multiple projects that are showing how intelligent design makes testable predictions.
So we keep hearing, don't tell us that these things exist, tell us what they are. Curious listeners want to test the details.
Using intelligent design to build nanomachines that can kill cancer, bacteria, and even viruses.
These would be nanomachines created by humans based on what we know about natural processes. Where does intelligent design fit into this? What's the ID specific angle for this?
Papers from this project have been published in journals like Nature, ACS Applied Materials, and Nature Nanotechnology.
Link 10 goes to a detailed article in Nature about the technology. No reference to intelligent design, though. Oddly, I didn't find anything on the Discovery Institute website that I felt deserved linking on this topic. There have been Nobel Prizes awarded in relation to this technology. Why isn't the success of this being linked to ID being plastered everywhere? If this is a success of the theory, why can't I find the detail? Did Casey just overstate his case? The best that I could find was a link suggesting that James Torr is involved in some of the research. See link 11 if you are unfamiliar with James Torr.
And we've been funding research into what we call overlapping genes, where there might be multiple overlapping reading frames where along a single strand of DNA.
Link 12 goes to an article in Nature that discusses overlapping genes. Note that the first referenced paper in the article talks about overlapping sequences and is dated 1976. See also link 13, which also links to the 1976 paper. This is how long we've known about overlapping genes. The date of 1976 is important because link 14 goes to an Evolution News article written by David Klinghoffer. Evolution News being a sub-website of the Discovery Institute, in which it is claimed that the microbiologist Siegfried Schrerer anticipated overlapping genes. Link 15 is a Wikipedia article on Siegfried Schrerer, and his education dates clearly show that he was 21 in 1976 and passed his exams in chemistry and biology a year later in 1977. All of which makes a claim that intelligent design predicted this feature highly questionable at least. While Casey simply said that they were funding this technology, which is good, I'm all for different organisations funding scientific advancement. But funding it is not the same as those findings confirming your pet theory. And when your organisation asserts that a finding was predicted by someone who literally could not have been there at the time, then, well, that's blatant dishonesty and it needs to be called out. Klinghoffer, you're a fucking liar!
We even used this project to identify a protein in the SARS-CoV-2 genome.
This is a hard claim to fact check, because there are many recent articles from many sources regarding the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Pretty much every biotech has been investigating this virus over the last 2 years. That a project that the Discovery Institute were helping to fund also found this is great. But as already said, helping to fund a discovery is not the same as that discovery affirming your pet idea.
Because ID predicted we would find things like overlapping genes in the genome.
Uh-oh. Did he really just say that? Casey Luskin, you're a liar too.
Another project we're funding is called the Waiting Times Project.
Link 16 goes to a PDF describing the waiting time problem, which uses the warning phrase neo-Darwinism. Any document that uses that phrase should come with a health warning. It is a classic dog whistle of any anti-evolutionary text. Be cautious of taking as fact any text that uses that phrase and always do your best to fact check everything they say. That said, the waiting time problem needs addressing. It is best summarized as this. Given the low probabilities of specific mutations arising, there is not enough time in history to wait for the changes to occur that have resulted in what we see around us today. Therefore, they could not have happened by naturalistic chance. This is of course bullshit. But there is a bigger point that needs to be addressed, and that's the misapplication of statistical chance. It needs addressing because on face value it appears to make sense. But appearances can be deceiving, and this one definitely is. They are technically right in that statistically, if you replayed the last 200 million years of evolution, the chances of all the right mutations happening, by chance, to arrive at all animals we have today being exactly as they are, is slim. If we replayed those 200 million years and left randomness to do its thing, we would need more than 200 million years of chance mutations to exactly duplicate what we have today. This is technically right, but the waiting time problem has a fatal flaw that should prevent it from being taken seriously. Consider this analogy. You're at home with a few friends and you get a standard deck of playing cards. You shuffle the deck and you play a game of whist with your friends. The first game ends, so you shuffle again and prepare to deal game 2. At this point, one of your friends objects. They say,
"You haven't shuffled the cards for long enough in order for the cards to arrive in exactly the same order as game 1.
"But I shuffled them for the same amount of time,"
you reply.
"But they're not in the same order,"
says the objector.
"The game can't be played until you've shuffled the cards to be in the exact order as before."
So you shuffle the cards a third time, and the objector still objects that
The cards are not in the right order.
"But the order doesn't matter,"
you say.
"The randomness is what matters. The fact that I got a result in a minute of shuffling is good enough. You don't need a specific result."
The objector keeps objecting until everyone else gets frustrated and throws them out. All you wanted was a card game. This is the flaw in the waiting time problem. History and evolution have shuffled our genes for 200 million years, and this is what we got. This is not the only possible or valid result. The waiting time problem assumes only one valid result, this one, and says all other options are equally possible and therefore need to be played out in order for us to get to what we have today. It's basic statistical buffoonery, and it shouldn't fool anyone. That Casey is touting it here as a viable ID argument shows just how bankrupt his thinking is. Do not respect this level of reasoning. It is not worth your time.
Arguments that we can find function for junk DNA, a successful prediction of intelligent design.
Notice how he said it's arguments for function in junk DNA that is a prediction of intelligent design. He didn't say evidence of function, which also means he therefore can't give full detail of any evidence. But there's a more serious point to make here. Junk DNA is no longer called junk DNA in scientific circles. It's called non-coding DNA, a term that has been in use for a long time. See link 17 for a PDF from 1987 that uses the term non-coding DNA. Given its use in the title, it is unlikely that this is the first occurrence of the term in science. This is more than 10 years before the Discovery Institute existed, and a few years before intelligent design started to become used commonly. Now, unless Casey has an intelligent design document that predates 1987 and the existence of the phrase itself, then he can't call non-coding DNA a prediction of intelligent design. It is a major cheat. To call non-coding DNA a prediction of intelligent design when non-coding DNA was known about before intelligent design advocates formulated an argument for it. This is literally shooting an arrow and then drawing a target around it. The lack of integrity in this claim is utterly shameful.
In all of our experience with a flagellum, or with the origin of that kind of information and complexity, it always traces back to a mind or a personal agent.
That's a very brave statement to make. This is a blunt assertion, and during the episode, Casey didn't offer any evidence to support it. He stated it, and it wasn't challenged, so it was left undefended. It's also unclear what exactly is meant by informational complexity in relation to a bacterial flagellum. We have no experience of a mind or personal agent in relation to the mechanics of a flagellum. So how does Casey get from the mechanics of a flagellum to informational complexity? These are the sorts of challenges I want to see made to him. Sadly, the other guest in this instance was a science historian and didn't want to challenge these specifics as they were outside of his own expertise, so the comment was left unchallenged. And that's where I'll leave it. If you wish to listen to the whole episode, see link 18, though I can't say I recommend it. You've had the highlights. The links in the show notes are probably more deserving of your time. Having put in a few hours checking the claims made in this episode, my impression of Casey Luskin and the Discovery Institute is not great. If you're deconstructing your faith, then do be careful to check the things that are said against genuine science sources. If you're a believer who relies on the information put out by the Discovery Institute, then ask yourself very seriously if you've ever made the effort to sanity check the claims they make. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay easy. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.